Louis, looking at this, they're talking about this, I suppose, in tandem with this goal of common prosperity and the like, so that's kind of reinforcing that to some extent. And give us a sense of how that's going. And well, we move on, I suppose, and talk about the real elephant in the room, which is the growth in this economy too.
Yeah, there's a lot going on, as you suggest, Rish. We have the common prosperity targets and policies that are looking at, making the income distribution more equal and improving people's opportunities. But meanwhile, we are witnessing a quite drastic slowdown. And so we are really going to look at a remarkably weak Q4, fourth quarter of the year, where we think that growth may fall in year-on-year terms to even below 4%. And that would, in a non-COVID crisis time, lower than 4% growth would, I think, start to raise alarm bells in Beijing. And so that's why we are expecting that they will eventually do something about this on the policy front.
On the energy crisis, talk us through the impact that it has downstream. Who would be likely impacted the most and how?
Yeah, so, local governments really look at who are the big electricity demanders, and so they see that, for instance, aluminum producers are huge demanders, and they are first in line for those cuts. But some have cut, even shopping mall times and more service sector oriented activities. So, I think heavy industry will be first in line, but other parts of the economy are not out of the woods either.
Louis, just had a headline just go through the US 5-year note has seen its yield about 1% for the first time since February of 2020. So, what is the bond market there telling the story about the US economy? And what does the bond market in China tell us about what's going on in the Chinese economy?
Well, bond markets are supposed to tell us, how investors look at price increases and economic growth. So the U.S. Bond yields and interest rates more generally are on the rise. Our colleagues expect that they will continue to be as the U.S. economy is getting out of the COVID crisis, and we have quite sizable growth over there. In China, until recently, we have seen not a huge fall of yields, because sometimes things get tricky, and we have both growth coming down and inflation going up, and that the bond market really doesn't like. And so I think in China we need to see, like, for instance, at the moment, all these energy crunches and things like that are going to have an impact on prices, are going to drive up prices. And so I think the bond market is really looking at those two forces. To what extent will growth weaken, and to what extent will inflation rise?
And Louis, I have to ask you, just in terms of what this means, because it seems like right now China is very serious about doubling down on reining in debt with the Evergrande crisis, and reining in carbon emissions as well, with what we're seeing with the power crunch there. At what cost, though? I mean, what is the pain threshold that China has, and how comfortable are they with a cooling economy? I mean, what sort of growth are they still able to be okay with to pursue this campaign?
Yeah, I think, Yvonne, that is really the question that many of us are wondering. I personally am a bit surprised that these local governments are, enforcing those production cuts at times that we all see that growth is going to weaken quite a bit. I still think that come the September data, come the October data, which is going to be really weak, that they are going to put things together and coordinate things and say, we've gone too far and we need to start not exactly prioritizing growth, but we need to also support growth. I think that in some indications we have already, People Daily, the newspaper, start criticizing local governments for these, what they call campaign style emission control. What they mean is that you should control emissions, but it shouldn't be so short-termish. And I think that policymakers will try to put things together. The end of the year is also a time that they do that anyway. They are starting to look at, what is the policy stance that we need for next year. And I would expect them to start to look a bit more at growth than they have done so far, because it's remarkable how little they seem to have cared about growth so far.
Louis, just a sense here of what we've witnessed, so much intervention by Chinese authorities in various different parts of the market so far this year. It's been a whole barrage of intervention and new regulations. Then we've got this crunch. We've also, of course, got what's going on with Evergrande and property. Is this also in danger of a policy overreach?
Yeah, I think one policy overreach is really about, how much, how tolerant do you expect your private sector to be, and and how much faith do you expect your private sector to retain in its leeway and its room to operate in the overall economy. I think the other question, we already talked a bit about this, is that how much pain are you willing to impose on the economy and on growth? I think that we really will start to see that in the coming months as growth will reach remarkably low levels, like lower than 4%.
Louis, thank you very much. Oxford Economics is Louis Kuijs joining us.